This is Modern Mindset, the show where we discuss the psychology and emotions of finance and business. I'm your host, Adam Cox, and joining me today is Michael Shapiro, who is head of commercial litigation and a partner at GSE. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, Michael, we're going to be talking a bit about some of the problems that can occur in the world of finance and business, legally speaking. But give us a bit about your background in terms of how you came to be at GSE and particularly how you started out.
Well, I started at GSE in 1988, shortly before my 18th birthday, and joined the firm as an office junior. So my role was making teas, doing photocopying and such. Eventually, I decided that I wanted to have a career in law and decided to do the legal executive course, which was a part-time course of day release in evening school over a period of 4 or 5 years. Eventually, I got through those exams and qualified as a legal executive in 1997, since which I've continued to expand my experience with the help of my colleagues at work. Eventually became head of litigation in 2004, and continued to work my way up to salary partner and now equity partner.
Excellent, fantastic. And for those of us that maybe aren't so familiar with kind of legal terminology, they might have heard things like litigation. What does it actually mean in kind of real life?
Well, litigation, the simple translation is dispute. So people have disputes about anything. It's litigation. There's very different types of litigation, whether it's personal injury or matrimonial. They're all litigation disputes. In terms of what I specialise in, I do a lot of landlord and tenant property litigation, insolvency litigation, company and commercial. So I deal with partnership disputes, shareholders disputes, general contract disputes, and a lot of private client matters such as disputed probates, and acting for big companies dealing with all their general litigation matters that are inevitable in any business.
And that's the thing. And litigation, nobody seeks it out, but sometimes you have to deal with problems, and there are disputes in day-to-day life, in business life. What are some of the ways, before we talk about litigation and how that can actually be implemented, what are some ways that we can kind of avoid it reaching a point of becoming a dispute?
Well, what I tend to find is that a lot of clients do not want to spend money on getting advice on certain things, whether it's before they enter into a contract, advice on the contract, or when they form a business, not having a shareholders agreement or a partnership agreement. And what tends to happen is that when things go wrong, they wish they did, and it becomes more expensive. So the cautionary tale here is that don't be afraid to spend a little bit of money on legal advice up front to make sure that you know how things are going to work in the future, because it will be more expensive if you don't.
It's kind of prevention is better than cure, isn't it?
The prevention is absolutely better than the cure. But I find that most of the time clients just don't want to do the prevention. So they spend money on the cure.
That's it. And you mentioned the financial side. People, particularly in kind of, we've just had a recent 10 years of kind of austerity and certain industries, people are trying to be more efficient, more lean. Is it possible to have that kind of mindset that, the legal kind of side of things is kind of, it's a nice to have rather than a need to have? Or is it a case that if you have that mindset, it can really cost you a lot more further down the line?
Well, I think for businesses, it's always going to be a question of risk management. Because if you don't want to spend the money up front, you take the risk of spending more later on.
Yeah.
So you really need to have that in mind. And there's no harm in picking up the phone, speaking to a lawyer, asking what it would cost if they were to look at a document or give you some upfront advice, and have it in mind. Don't just decide, I don't want to spend the money, because you might find that it's not as expensive as you think, and then decide, well, it's worth spending that money now and avoiding the problems later on.
And emotionally, is it a case of people being a bit, trying to scrimp here and save there, or is it a case that, people don't really like getting involved in the kind of legal side, and it's almost like, well, if I avoid it, I don't have to think about it? Is there a case of business owners perhaps putting their head in the sand, a bit of an ostrich syndrome?
Well, that probably is the case in, I would say, a minority of situations, because I would expect that most businessmen are astute enough to understand that lawyers are going to be needed. They've set up a business, they needed a lawyer for that. So they know that lawyers are out there to help them. We're not all there to make life difficult for them. We're there to help them. So burying your head in the sand is not a good idea, but it does happen. And I would say, as a litigator, I probably make more money because people have buried their head in the sand to begin with.
Yeah, it is a case that, it's almost like if people save a little bit of money by not brushing their teeth every day, they have very painful, trips to the dentist, and better to be safe than sorry, isn't it?
Well, I think that's a perfect scenario, if that is how you put it. People are penny pinching, understandably, in this day and age. But that's how they want to run their business. No one can force them.
No, totally. And it can be quite serious and detrimental, can't it? I mean, what are some of the consequences of litigation? Can it literally make a business bankrupt, insolvent? How serious can it be if it gets to the point of litigation and dispute?
Well, litigation is expensive. There's no sugarcoating that. So what I would seek to do from the earliest stage possible is to nip the dispute in the bud, to understand what the problem is, and maybe whether it's through mediation, adjudication, or just getting the parties in a room to come to a compromise. It's cheaper and quicker because litigation is uncertain. Both parties will spend a lot of money. Both parties will spend a lot of time. And you can't put a cost on the directors of a company spending money dealing with the dispute instead of running their own business. So
it's not just the financial cost, it's the opportunity cost. If their mental resources and emotional resources are all tied up in that dispute, they're not actually doing the things they should be doing.
Correct. And that's whether you're a director of a large corporation, a small business, or an individual. You're going to have the emotional stress of the litigation, both in terms of worrying what the outcome will be, worrying how much it's going to cost, worrying if you lose, can you afford it? Because some businesses will fold because they can't afford the costs to the other side, or they can't afford the award made against them if they lose. So there is that worry, which is why get a lawyer in as early as possible,
sooner rather than later,
to resolve it.
And you've worked in this kind of area of specialism for a long time. We're talking 30 years. What are some of the emotions that you've seen over that time period? And is it the case that pride and ego gets in the way of seeking these kind of more cost-effective, quicker solutions, and people want to be right, not necessarily find the shortest outcome?
Yeah, a lot of the time what I find is that there's a point of principle, an element of revenge. The parties have, the relationship has broken down to a point that they want to stick it to each other, for want of a better phrase. And as a lawyer, one of my jobs is to perhaps make them see sense commercially, and come to a resolution that they may not be entirely happy with, but they can live with, because they prefer to be in that situation than end up having a 2-year litigation battle through the courts, spending all the money and coming with an outcome that they're very unhappy with.
Mm.
So early settlement that you can live is better for everyone around.
It almost sounds like a game show. It's kind of like, you run the risk perhaps of a better outcome, but is that risk worth taking if, there's something that gives you an element of certainty? And you're absolutely right. That kind of opportunity cost of just that ongoing investment and time and attention, taking you away from a business could actually cost you way more than whatever you stand to gain by pursuing, a particular line in litigation.
No, absolutely. As I've said, that the people that run the businesses, there's an intangible cost to them for their time and energy that they could better use in running their business and making money.
Mm. And from your expertise and experience, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges that business owners face, legally speaking?
That's a difficult question because it's just getting contracts right, terms and conditions correct. So when you deal with your customer, everyone understands your contractual position. Because if it's not correctly put together and always ambiguous and uncertain, that's what leads to litigation and disputes. So I do find that that's where a lot of companies fall down, because they haven't kept their contracts and terms and conditions up to date, whether it be from modern customary practices within their industries or legal principles that been brought into play, whether it's new Parliament acts or case law. And it's worth having a health check now and again, just to have a review, again at a small cost, but worth doing, to make sure that you don't fall into trouble.
And what kind of things would be covered in that kind of that checkup, that kind of review?
Well, you look at their terms and conditions, you look at their contracts that they have with their clients and their suppliers, perhaps, employment contracts, looking at their internal regulatory procedures. If they're a large company, they may want to have all their documentation in ship shape, just in case they want to sell the business or they want to float the business. So it's always worth keeping your corporate documents updated.
And I guess if there's certain things that aren't in place, then it makes it harder to sell the business or less desirable for a business to kind of want to buy that company.
Correct.
Simply because some of their key foundations are ambiguous or messy.
Absolutely. So if you're going to float on the stock exchange or AIM, or you're going to sell your business, there's going to be due diligence, and they're going to say, well, hold on a second, I don't like this and I don't like that, and they're going to offer you less money because there's a risk, there's more of a risk element, or they might walk away.
That's it. And you mentioned right at the beginning, kind of prevention is better than cure. In your experience, if you were giving advice to, let's say, a business owner, what would you say are the key pitfalls really that they should be looking to avoid those kind of headaches later?
Well, when setting up a business, you've got to ensure that you have your partnership agreements and shareholders agreements. I've come across many situations where they've not done that or not done it very well, and the parties have broken down, their relationship's broken down, and they end up being unable to resolve their dispute, and perhaps the business ends up having to be put into liquidation because there is no mechanism for dealing with that dispute.
Right.
And that's one of the common problems that I come across.
And how simple is it to get something like a partnership agreement if it's done right and it's done early?
We see many documents take a standard form, but then you've got to tailor it to what the parties want to achieve and what their business is like. So it is relatively easy, so long the shareholders or the partners make it absolutely clear what they want to happen, and then the lawyers do their magic.
They kind of make it right for them.
They make it absolutely right. They put it in black and white, so it's absolutely clear, so everyone knows in the event that something happens, what will then occur?
And you mentioned, kind of point of principle and things like that. To what extent are things like pride or stubbornness potentially quite costly when it comes to, kind of legal areas?
Well, I always advise a client that fighting a point of principle, you might as well go and put the money on black or red, because that is not a sensible or commercial way to think about things. They may be right. They may have been wronged, but that doesn't make fighting a battle just for the sake of it the right thing to do. So you need to take your lawyer's advice. You need to listen to that lawyer's advice. No one's going to force you to take the lawyer's advice, but at least you go in with your eyes open that if you're going to fight on a point of principle, fight because you just want revenge and you just don't like the other person, that you understand the consequences of doing so.
And consequences can be wasted time, wasted money, and lots of stress and headaches.
Stress, headache, costs, uncertainty in the outcome, and if you can't afford to lose, the loss of your business.
And thinking like further ahead, because sometimes people are very focused in the moment. Business owners, they've got very long to-do lists. There's always kind of fires to fight and kind of things to do. To what extent is it important as people start building, businesses or kind of acquiring assets, that they also need to have an element of thought for perhaps, future generations, kind of where this legacy could lead?
Well, as you build a business, most people want to either leave it to their children or make sure that there is continuity in the business through other people taking it on. So you've got to make it a viable business that continues. And then, of course, you can have lawyers deal with the structure of your business to make sure that it can be handed down in the smoothest possible way, in the most cost-effective possible way, and perhaps the most tax-efficient way.
I guess that's an important thing as well, isn't it? Because you've got different legal entities and, different ways of structuring, things to make it, either easier or simpler if all different eventualities happen. How far ahead should business owners really be thinking when it comes to that kind of stuff, to kind of thinking ahead? Or should it be factored in right at the very beginning?
You can only foresee so far. But when you start up a business, it depends what your business is doing. As you grow, you may need to change your structure. So if you're a two-man business, then you're only going to want to take your structure so far. But as you grow and you become a multi-million-pound industry, whether you're international, then you may want to revisit things as you progress. That's why a regular health check with your lawyer. Tell them what's going on. One of the things that we like to do is keep in touch regularly with our clients, so they tell us what's going on. They may not think about what they need, but when they tell us, we'll say to them, well, have you thought about X and Y? They'll probably say they haven't, but then the seed is planted in their head, and they may then say, right, well, can we sit down and talk about it? What shall I do?
And obviously, we're in a transitional time. There's big things like Brexit. We're still going through that negotiating kind of process. To what extent are the changes that are happening, in political and kind of business things affecting people in a business environment right now? Well,
I think businesses are being cautious simply because no one knows. No one knows what the outcome is going to be, what deal, if any, is going to be made, and what the future holds, whether it's going to be prosperous or not. So they're being very cautious. And that's all any of us can do, because no one knows what's going to happen. It's all very confusing, isn't it?
It is. And I guess, legally speaking, it makes sense to kind of just focus on the variables that you can control, and have certain things in place for, to reduce those risks of variables outside of your control.
Well, we can't control what we can't control. As new laws are passed, whether it's to do with Brexit or not, then we get a message out to our clients that this change in the law may affect you. Come and see us. Let's talk about what needs to be done, if anything.
Absolutely. And if you were offering, let's say, a couple of tips to a business owner that could immediately help them, are there things that, taking your 30 years of experience, condensing it down, say, well, look, practical advice, you know what, you should do something like this. What kind of advice would you offer?
I think the best advice is something that I've already covered, and that is have that health check. Go and see your lawyer. Explain what you're doing in your business. Make sure you've kept all your contracts, terms and conditions, employment contracts up to date. Have them checked. Get a health check, and just make sure that you have done your prevention exercise. Avoid the expensive cure.
Absolutely. And in the global world, constant media, constant 24-hour news and things like that, we have had our first, high-profile CEO, president on the global stage in terms of Donald Trump. He seems quite litigious to me. He seems like he would seek out, kind of a battle and things. And obviously he's financially successful. Do you think this sets a confusing role model for those people aspiring to be financially wealthy in the world of business?
Well, if Mr. Trump needs a lawyer in London, he can always give me a call. Sounds like my perfect type of client. Well, I think this is quite controversial, whichever way you look at it. He forgets that he's the president of the most powerful country in the world, and not the CEO of his board. And I think the behaviour of those two characters has to be different. CEO can rub people up the wrong way. It's his business. He can do what he likes. But Mr. Trump is now representing... can't remember how many people in America, 360 million or something like that, people. And I think, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, perhaps engage his brain before he moves his lips.
I think he's been offered that advice before.
Listen, I don't disagree with everything he says or disagree with what his intentions are. He just says it the wrong way.
But his kind of aggressive approach of constantly threatening dispute, do you think that's kind of to kind of ward people off so that he has less stress? Or do you think that some people just seek confrontation and seek out disputes?
Oh, I think he totally does. I don't think he has the that sort of political mindset that there is a certain way of talking to your counterparts, and I just think he, as an individual, he's going to create litigation for his own country at this rate.
No, fair enough. And being involved in kind of legal, the legal world for so long, does it affect how you make decisions personally? Are you constantly like on edge of where, because whenever I watch like a TV show, which is courtroom drama, constantly I'm thinking, right, well, that's going to end up in court. That's going to end up in court. Are you kind of overly cautious in real life because of how you live your life?
Absolutely. Don't want to miss a payment. Don't want to end up with a bailiff on my door.
Yeah.
Want to make sure my mortgage is paid. I mean, because I know all the problems that everyone faces by things they do or don't do. Yeah. I know that I don't want to put myself in those situations because I know how painful it can be when you do.
Absolutely. I think it's a really interesting conversation. So thanks for joining us on the show today, Michael.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thanks for joining me this week on Modern Mindset. In association with Share Radio, join me again next week for more.